Welcome to another episode of Aysha in the Spotlight. Now, he claims to be one of the most Googled men on the planet and now says he's operating under the divine instructions of God. But is Andrew Tate the right role model for men and for young Muslim men in particular? Or could he be leaving behind a trail of destruction? Joining me to talk about the subject is Khalil Bichel from Ehsan Mosque. Hi, Khalil.
How are you doing?
Andrew Tate. A good role model or a bad one for young Muslim men, and for men in particular?
The subject of Andrew Tate is not something that can be discussed easily. There's many different facets to the phenomenon that is Andrew Tate. There's a couple of points I've written down that I think need to be taken into consideration before any type of communication or any type of commentary. To start off with, as Muslims, we don't defend indefensible actions. At the same time, he's somebody who's been imprisoned for several months without charge, and he's currently under house arrest. He's given a broad swathe of messages to men, generally younger men, to take responsibility. Then, of course, we know he said Shahada, and many people have said on the back of that he needs to make some kind of proclamation that he's disassociated himself from types of activities he did before becoming Muslim, and we have to ask ourselves to what degree has he disassociated himself from these things. At the same time, he's calling people to Islam. There's no doubt about that. Whenever he can, he raises the understanding, and because of that, he has overwhelming support from particularly young Muslim men. And then you've got other issues with also social media people. There's dangers of aggrandizement, thinking too much of themselves based on public support.
Yeah, but from my research into Andrew Tate and my following of him and his social media posts over a good number of months, what does concern me is that really, is he the right role model? Yes, of course, he has triggered some really valid issues that, men have been emasculated in today's society. They're very disillusioned. They feel they need a role model. But is he the right role model? Because the message that he really ultimately conveys is one of power, of strength. That men have to be the dominant species. It's not really a balanced perspective.
What is a perfect role model?
What is a perfect role model?
Yeah.
What is perfect? What if he's going to be a role model for men, and if he's going to be a representative of Islam to some degree, as he is now has embraced Islam and he does talk about it more, then it's not right really that we have a man who has. I mean, we need to see where he's going to be going forward in the future. But previously, the values that he espouses are. He's talked a lot about his hedonistic lifestyle. He's very focused on high levels of materialism. It's very much about status, and also the way that he talks to people and the way he communicates is very condescending, is very belittling. He doesn't have respect when he speaks to people. It's his whole aura and his whole personality is when you watch him and you see him, you never come away feeling, oh, this is a man who's got compassion and empathy and respect for people and who has a balanced approach. I come away feeling that this is a guy who's also quite an extremist man. But now he's extreme, and his extremism is going in at this point in time is about what a man should be, and really is a man what he is saying it is. Perhaps many years ago, men at a particular time it was all about being strong and repressing your emotions and being very stoic. But in hundreds of years, men have not been like that. Men are able to show emotions if they want to do that.
Well, the modern form of man seems to be that of a type of Woody Allen type character, which is not particularly appealing. This is what men are told that they have to become. So, okay, from a point of view of an Islamic role model, you probably have to look at previous Islamic role models like Malik al-Shabazz, Malcolm X, and certainly Muhammad Ali. And, then you have to look at the fact that even with people like Malcolm X, the jury's out now in terms of was he a positive influence on society or wasn't he? Was he a man of knowledge? Was he somebody who had a beneficial influence on people? Was he somebody who was, you could say, justified in speaking about the subjects that he did? So, you have to look at these things in a type of context of things that have gone before. Now, in terms of Andrew Tate, there's a long way for him to go until he becomes somebody like that. There was an immense amount of learning that Malik el-Shabazz underwent after becoming Muslim, that I would say that perhaps Andrew Tate needs to consider. Then his commentary on things in a political sense. The world is not a simple place, and it's all very well claiming things to be of a black and white form. This matrix he's talking about, how do you actually educate people on the nature of what this thing is? So, there kind of has to be another angle there where certain understandings have to be grasped by him if he's to genuinely expose the nature of power in this time. But in terms of him being a role model, again, we're living in an age where, as you say, many men feel emasculated, and that you might say is a fault of men. But one could argue that there's a lot of emphasis on men of certain forms and people of certain forms generally, but there's not many role models per se for men. Where do they actually take things from? Are actors in Hollywood role models for men?
But he is coming out with his message is masculinity and what is masculinity, and this is masculinity. But is his message of what is masculinity even correct? It all seems to be about having a buff body, being really financially rich, being able to get the hottest chicks if you get to that position. It's not really promoting anything that is of virtue and of anything of morality or anything that is ultimately going to lead to a person being ultimately achieving long-term peace and happiness in their life, because you're getting people onto this path of, once again, extremism. It's extremism of the self. I've got to be the perfect person. I've got to be the best person I can be, which is also an ego trip.
What's your, for men generally and people, who are their role models? As Muslims, men and women, we know who our role model is. So, this is the kind of thing that needs to be inquired about. And in terms of his actions prior to Shahada, we understand as Muslims, we can't speak about these things in a disparaging way, but at the same time, there's all sorts of videos that are continually being propped up of him saying things that are, indefensible from an Islamic point of view.
Yeah.
So there has to be a kind of understanding that he's flagging certain things up. He's flagging certain points up, many of which have a bearing and a resonance with young men. What you're arguing is that what he's giving people from that is something that is not beneficial to them. I would say in a very simple sense, if somebody's holding a sign up saying, "Look at Islam," there's something about that, again, it's not that we judge that as everything that is, that alone is somehow makes a person really, really credible and really, really important. But that it has to be at least acknowledged that, certainly from my own experiences, anecdotally speaking, many of the young men who I've talked about in the past who have become Muslim in the last few months that I've met personally have, been aware of Andrew Tate prior to finding Islam to some degree, and his flagging this thing up as saying something needs to be looked at there. That alone acts as a type of signpost.
And what are these young men who are coming to the mosque that you're meeting, who have been influenced and inspired by Andrew Tate? What is it they say it is about him that's brought them towards Islam?
Well, I wouldn't like to generalise. It's more that I wouldn't like to say that they all found Islam through Andrew Tate. It wasn't really that simple, I don't think. But, it kind of lent credibility to some degree, where you had somebody who was seen to have prominence in the world. To what type of prominence and the nature of the prominence, that's another thing that needs to be looked at. That goes into the realm of social media and what, the nature of fame. But in terms of him just saying, Islam is something that needs to be, should be looked at, that alone, I would say, is certainly something that many young men that I've met were aware of. Whether or not that was the initial factor in them looking at Islam. And then it's a question of, with the young men who've said Shahada, something we've spoken about previously, how have they said Shahada? Is it something they've done online? This online phenomenon of thinking you've discovered Islam online, or like learning about Islam online, and then, saying Shahada after that. So the question would be is where they've gone after it. And I could actually say that certainly with the young men I know who were aware of who this man was, they're certainly not emulating him in his form in terms of being a Muslim. They understand he's not a teacher of Islam.
Got it.
He's not a teacher of the Islamic sciences.
He's just he's inspiring them towards it because he's making it more contemporary and more credible according to modern society. He's kind of this. Because in modern society we don't really have anyone who's kind of cool and contemporary who's saying I'm a Muslim, and he's got that status at this point in time. So when he does talk about that, it does inevitably have a big impact on people who are watching him.
Sure.
But the concern is that, currently, obviously, he's under house arrest, and should he come out of house arrest, I guess the proof is in the pudding as to how he conducts himself afterwards, because he can't continue with the hedonistic lifestyle, the sleeping around with hot chicks, and the very belittling and condescending remarks that he makes about people who are richer, who are poorer than him, who are weaker than him, who are, or women as well. He has to modify that for him, for him to be taken seriously. Once he has come out of house arrest, if he is going to be appealing to Muslims.
He needs guidance. He needs company. And for people in his position, it's particularly hard to find that, particularly people you actually trust.
Yeah.
But in terms of finding knowledge of the deen, again, Islam is not something you can really learn online. You don't learn Islam.
He's not learning it online. He has some close friends and some close allies who are gradually bringing him into it. He's been reading the Quran while he was in prison. He is,
Islamic teachings are vast, and we've touched on some of the subjects that new Muslims. Really, what to look at him as a new Muslim is you can say Shahada, but you need to find Islam, and and again, finding an abstract version of it through whomever it is you might be around might or might not be the most calibrated or highest transmission of what that actually is. So again, for people who we found certainly in the limelight, they find this default position of in some ways thinking Islam being Islamic necessitates a type of change in dress, which we've not really seen with Andrew Tate. But if he starts appearing on screen like a Saudi Arabian, and using certain terms that are associated with this kind of form of Islam, that's something to worry about. Because that's a bit more serious. And
I guess that's something we're going to be able to see over time. Because right now he's under house arrest. It's when he comes out of this. That's when we'll see whether there's been a difference made to him. But what I find extremely interesting is that there's been a lot of psychoanalysis done of Andrew Tate. A lot of psychologists, forensic psychologists, other experts who say that this is a man on a psychological level who suffers from quite a lot of psychological conditions, be they narcissistic personality disorder, potentially antisocial personality disorder. Also, potentially he has traits of psychopathy, because in the way that he communicates with people, he's never respectful. He doesn't take into account people's feelings. He's never shown any guilt or any remorse or any regret for anything that he said. What he does modify his content, but that's only when he receives criticism and when it's going to impact his social media influencing role and career. So how can you be going forward, was he ever to potentially become a leader for Muslims? That's very worrying, because to be an effective leader, you need to have heart. And from psychiatrists that I've spoken to, they don't feel that he has much capacity for self-reflection, much capacity for deep thought, remorse, empathy. And these are critical factors that we as Muslims need to be aware of and cognizant about with those that we're listening to. We can't, he also has a very strong rhetorical style, which is very much almost like a fear-mongering style. If it was to, even what he says now, I can imagine if he was to be preaching about, the way he preaches now, if he was to be preaching about another topic, say Islam, his style is very strong, it's very dogmatic, it's very forceful, it's very opinionated. There is no room for openness, open-mindedness, or for compassion.
Okay, there's a number of things that you said. The first thing is that he has to, in some ways, as I said to you, find company, find a coherent transmission of it. The second thing is, for people that actually follow him, none of these psychological assessments mean anything. They're not in the slightest bit interested. he's giving them something that they feel that they need. And again, the rise of people
these are people who have evaluated him over a period of time and have watched have watched all his output. They do have substance.
It's not that psychiatric assessment isn't valid, but again, there's a degree in which you can make accurate assessments with somebody online. I mean, it's all right taking a whole collage of different things that he said and then, judging from that. But in reality, you don't actually know anyone until you meet them. When this is a whole thing, really. So
you can tell how somebody is through their consistent, constant, regular postings on social media. That does give a pretty strong indicator of who they are, and also through lengthy, long interviews.
Well, people think it does.
Well, it does.
When you meet somebody face to face,
but that's not the issue. It's not about meeting them face to face. It's what they're putting out there. It's the content they're putting out there. It's the content that's being received by the audience.
Sure, I'm not saying everyone needs to meet Andrew Tate face to face. Probably humanly impossible to undertake such a task. But there's one thing that you can say about people who are supporting him, and so they have to question, is a type of fixation with fame affirming Islam. So in other words, many Muslims in this day and age have felt Muslims and Muslim men in particular kind of belittled by society. The religion they follow has not received a positive press in the last 20 years. So, it's kind of like any graspings of substance to anyone speaking positively about Islam is warmly received. But, in that process, you have to ask yourself, why do we need famous people to affirm what we follow and what we have? Are we really that worried? Are we really that concerned that, people of influence who have spoken about Islam in a disparaging manner for many years, then all of a sudden a few people start speaking about Islam in a positive way. Is that really important for us personally? And I think that's the question we have to ask, is that, this whole thing with fame and the importance of fame and famous people, even for, relatively well-known Muslim scholars who are very strong in the deen, the concept of fame is a tremendous danger for them.
Absolutely.
And, certainly with somebody like Andrew Tate, who's definitely been facing, I would say, from what I understand, a type of injustice. The nature of the injustice is one thing, but, in terms of it, for him, his encouragement comes from support of thousands of people. And he mentioned this himself in the recent interview. So he said, these people are supporting me. But again, the self-aggrandizement that anyone famous has is an issue. And the attention people get from that is a problem for them. Now, really, Islamically speaking, people who have become Muslim from a point of view of mass influence, from a point of view of everyone kind of like bowing down to them, they're quite willing to understand that a great many of their followers will not follow them after declaring themselves Muslim. And it might well be that many famous people have become Muslim and certainly haven't declared it publicly. So, in the end, what they basically have is that through somebody like Andrew Tate, they're in some ways, he's got the perseverance to see it through to a degree where he's happy about saying, I'm Muslim. So, but the point is in terms of, you have to look at the man himself and what's actually good for him. Irrespective of what redress he makes in regards to the actions he's done in the past, irrespective of the actions before he became Muslim, which we shouldn't be speaking about really, but again, these videos online showing all this stuff, you have to have some concern from the guy from the point of view, not just because he's facing what quite clearly seems to be a type of arrest without charge, which is that's a serious thing within itself. The danger in many respects is the support he has, is not the persecution, because the support he has from all these people for him personally can be poisonous, as it all can. Now, the only
what do you think his ongoing potential, like his legacy, could be? What do you think he's actually? Do you think is going to happen?
We don't know what's going to happen in our own lives, let alone somebody else's.
Sometimes there's patterns that demonstrate themselves that you can get indications from.
Sure, I mean you can get indications from these types of things. We know generally, we feel that we have a certain form. We think we know who we are, but do we really? the type of thing that he almost certainly needs, which he's very unlikely to find online in a positive light, is Sufism.
But then, you know, I spoke to one psychiatrist who says that from their analysis of Andrew Tate, he doesn't seem to have the capacity for going beyond, you know, going within. It doesn't, he, you know, because of what he seems to, what he's, you know, the psychiatrist believes that he actually probably does experience, there doesn't seem to be much depth to this man. It seems to be very much about fame, very much about his high IQ. Yes, he's charming, he's got high IQ, he's got a seduction appeal, and that is potentially also a dangerous thing.
Nobody's got any business commenting on the where they think he might be in the future.
Why not? Because
we've got to be
because so
concerned
far
with
because so far he has already had, although he's triggered some very important points, he's raised some phenomenal issues that really need to be discussed, and the force of his personality has brought them
Sure.
to the forelight,
All right, yeah.
to the forefront. It is important for us to look at what his, you know, what might be happening long term, because so many young men are watching him, and it's better for them to be aware of that earlier on than later.
Where he goes from now is in between him and his Lord, and with all of us. But I don't disagree.
But it's not a private him and his Lord. This is a very public forum.
Exactly. I'm not saying it shouldn't be discussed, but you're talking about the future, which is a completely different thing. I mean, in terms of his current thing, his current state, his current situation, there's obviously things he needs to learn. If he's going to talk about the world, it can't be this ambiguous matrix. There are certain knowledges as to how the world has been shaped in the manner that it has, that if he's to take educating people on the nature of power, for example, he needs to read books like Technique of the Coup de Banque by Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Murabit, who we've spoken about before, because this, again, is a very concise book that breaks down the nature of how certain financial institutions have seized power.
Okay.
So, I mean, that one book is something that he needs to look at.
Do you think he's been guided right? Do you think he has the right guidance around him?
I've no idea. I mean, I know that anyone coming into Islam, the biggest danger is themselves. It's not about the external matrix. The danger is the matrix of the self. And it's this winding, intertwined thing that we think is us, that we bring into Islam. And ostensibly, there's all sorts of things that, you know, young Muslim men are bringing into Islam pertaining to their relationships with women, pertaining to how they see the world, pertaining to many aspects that, you know, Islam filters over time. You know, anyone that puts their head on the floor 5 times a day, inshallah, will go forward. But again, the aspect of Sufism is that it's an intensification of the process, and you see wonders quickly if you find the right guidance. And, you know, this is again something that one has to speak about quite carefully. But the bigger the self, the bigger the reality of the person, the more they need this. And it's not anyone that doesn't really need it. Sufism is not some helmet that you put on and say, I'm a Sufi. It's simply an understanding of the science that we hold ourselves back. You are your biggest enemy.
Yeah.
I am my biggest enemy.
Right.
Now, again, our interaction with the world and how Allah tests us through the world affects how we think of ourselves, if it's affirmatory or if it's negatory. It's, you know, we either have that in our world or in one way or the other. But the test is not so much the world. The enemy is not the world. The enemy is ourselves. And I'm not trying to be semantic about these things. It is actually an issue with people becoming Muslim and carrying types of baggage in them to, after saying Shahada and thinking if they've said Shahada, everything's fine. But as we've spoken about before, after Islam, you need coherent company. You need community, really. And, you know, in the last 200 years, we've seen the demise of community worldwide.
Ihsan Mosque has a prominent profile. You have a lot of scholars who have emanated from there. Have you ever thought about contacting Andrew Tate directly?
Well, I said it to numerous people that he should visit Norwich if he can. The Norwich Community is established. It's got, you see, you know, a whole crop of people that have come from it that have been influential, you know, but in the deen. And, you know, there's many of them that have gone through Norwich, and certainly with the teachings of Sheikh Abdul Qadir, to be very prominent people in the world. Something that I was aware of with, you know, there's one person, I won't name who, but Sheikh Abdul Qadir had coming to him in the last 30 years, and he had a particular creative path in his life. And I don't want to mention even what he does, because people might be able to deduce who that is. It's a personal thing that was shared with me. Sheikh Abdul said, you forget it all. Forget what you do creatively. Abandon it. So the man did that for several years. And in that, found a type of tawakkul, found a type of certainty, found a type of connection with Allah that wasn't there before, and he wasn't being propped up by the gift he'd been given. So this thing of propping yourself up by what you have, it's not that you reject it, but there has to be a kind of re-evaluation of it. So, but then Sheikh Abdul Qadir gave him permission to go back into it again. And he became an incredibly, an amazing person, amazing creative person when he went back. So there's a type of reflection inwardly, which no doubt Andrew Tate has gone through, because he's been separated from the world. He was put in prison. But what we digest and reflect internally cannot be counterbalanced correctly unless you have a range of very credible, very knowledgeable, and very firm, and kind of people that are not going to affirm who you are in terms of who you were. It has to be a kind of zone of community. And certainly, I think if Andrew Tate were to visit Norwich, the Ihsan Mosque, again, we'd have to kind of calm ourselves down. It's like, it's not really like that.
Do you know, many people also say that actually he's only utilising Islam to raise his profile. This is all a strategy. I mean, he's a very strategic person. He has a very high IQ. He's very power-driven. And some people are saying that he's just spotted the opportunity with Islam and finding potential followers, that this is not a genuine embracement.
That is definitely not our business. Mm-hmm. Nobody can question the validity of somebody embracing Islam. Now, at the same time...
Well, we can question it if it means that that person has a massive public platform, depending on what they are.
All right, well, we can't get too drunk about it. We can't get too excited, which obviously everyone has with Andrew Tate. You have to take a kind of step back.
Which we do.
Well, people have to take a step back with people like Andrew Tate and say, okay, let's not get too excited here. There's a potential for something to happen.
Yes.
And again, in terms of him, for his own benefit, really, as much as anyone else's. But, Allah knows where people will go and, how people will do things. And that's something he's, as I say, the biggest problem he's got, as the biggest problem I've got. My biggest problem is myself. His biggest problem is himself. And again, people like Andrew Tate, as we've talked about, the world's propping them up and fighting against them in a completely different way than someone like me, who's relatively obscure.
Yeah. What were your views on his BBC interview? What did you think of the way he performed in it?
I think he actually had a type of trust in the BBC that they were going to actually represent the fact this man had been put in prison without charge. And again, talking about that and understanding that for what it is, I think he almost thought they were going to bring that out. And, any lawyer would have said to him, whatever you do, when you're facing criminal trials, do not speak to the media. It's the last thing you do. Because, and again, even though he tried to steer away from things, there's a type of, obviously self-incrimination is the worst outcome. But there's a type of thing whereby, it could influence the jurors if he said certain things that indicate a certain thing. It's probably not. It wasn't advisable for him to do that. I think he actually thought the BBC would fairly represent what he feels is a type of injustice, and a great many people agree with that. Irrespective of what you think of the guy, having this thing where you're put in prison until charges are kind of found. You've got to understand, somebody who's committed a crime quite obviously is charged instantaneously. But again, the nature of these things with people and the nature of some of the claims of the ladies, I'm not negating that. It's not that we don't really know, but again, the police, hopefully the investigators have a type of knowledge of how to get these things out of people who've been abused, men who've been abused by other men, men have been abused by women, women have been abused by men. They know enough to be able to get chargeable evidences. So it's questionable.
Yeah,
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We've got to have a type of... It's a strange thing going on with I don't really know the question.
Something I'm interested in is he does seem to, he's spoken about, martyrdom, he's spoken about, being under the divine instruction of God. For that reflects to me that there is a potential that going forward he might become more inclined towards the Islamic faith in terms of his social media presence and the direction he moves in, that would be very worrying.
If he takes from the wrong people, it's going to turn into a very, a more of a sorry state of affairs than it is. In terms of, again, right, at this point in time, he's not propagating teaching the deen.
No, he's not.
He's not trying to do that. If anything, he's trying to teach people about how the world works. But as I've said, somebody in that position needs to read, basically books by people that have assessed what's actually happening in the world.
Yeah, but he's come into the religion having not even read the Quran itself.
I didn't read the Quran when I became Muslim. That's not, you learn these things over time, and that's a personal thing. That's ibadah. And that's not really anyone's business, but again,
well, you should read the Holy Scriptures prior to embracing it and transforming. You should, have at least read a book which is very small before you decide that I'm going to become a Muslim and embrace that faith for the rest of your life. It's not a logical step to take to not embrace it.
There is
logic will tell you that if you're going to come into a new faith, you need to firstly believe in that faith, and you believe in that faith by actually studying the scripture. If you're not doing it through that technique, then you're just doing it through hearsay and through a bit of inspiration from people. That's not actually taking you to the crux of the faith.
Respectfully, nobody who becomes Muslim goes to the crux of Islam immediately. It's impossible to do that.
It's not impossible to read the Quran.
Yeah, I know, but alhamdulillah, many people become Muslims reading the Quran, but people have become Muslim on the battlefield with a sword over their heads, and they understand that if they become Muslim, the Muslim who will be fighting them maybe completely legitimately. This is like 1,400 years ago. I'm not talking about something that's happened recently. The stories pertaining to this, they've said Shahada on the battlefield with the knowledge they'll escape death, and many of you don't question. Nobody can question anyone's Shahada.
As Ehsan Mosque, as representatives of Ehsan Mosque, as having many young men who have been influenced by Andrew Tate who are coming to Islam, what due diligence, do you have a strategy or a format as to how you then work with these individuals?
Well, it's an interesting point. Two young boys in school uniform ended up in the mosque quite recently. And, I kind of thought they were sons of, generational Muslims. This man turned around to me in the foyer, a young man, he's 14 years old, introduced me by his name and said, I've become Muslim. And I found this really fascinating. So what actually happened there, and it's actually quite good to look at this, however they thought about Islam before, however it came into their hearts by Allah, they saw Islam as being something credible. Over probably a period of years or months, became friends with a Muslim friend they had in school, who was from a Turkish background, who actually met and is a very, very lovely, sweet, friendly man, a very lovely chap. And these guys are 14. So there's now a trend in their school of becoming Muslim. Now, literally, one of them became Muslim, then another one, both of whom were friends with this generational Muslim, and then a third one, and then they're working on another chap who was there who wasn't Muslim, who'd come into the mosque with them. So it's beyond our control, and again, because of their age, we can't really have any direct involvement in what they're doing. They're on their own path, and we haven't really spoken to them much. They popped up a little bit a while ago and then haven't come back again. But, that gave me quite an interesting insight as to the fact that they see Islam as being credible, and it's by Allah. Allah's putting things in people's hearts where they see this path as something meaningful and credible. And Hidayah is from Allah. You can speak about Islam as much as you want. It's Allah that will guide people. But there seems to be a trend in, however it's happening. And I'm not saying this is all happening for Andrew Tate. I'm not saying it's all happening online. I don't know how it's by Allah that it's happening, but there's certainly a surge, or not a surge as such, but a rise in how I'm assessing people's interest in Islam. When I became Muslim, it was post 9/11. Some people kind of looked at me in quite a bewildered state. It's like I went to Syria pre 9/11, came back post 9/11. And the fear that I had was that people would think I became Muslim because the World Trade Center was blown up, but none of my friends thought that, and it wasn't like no one that I met thought that. Funnily enough, Because they looked at me and I had, you know, whatever credibility Allah's given me, they saw something and they were like, right, okay, so this guy's not, you know, what I would see as somebody who's not competent. He looks competent and he's talking about becoming Muslim. It doesn't matter if he did it in the last few months, before or after 9/11. You know, so the climate has shifted slightly, I would say, into being a kind of zone where Islam is not being seen in the same manner that it was. And this is something that all Muslims need to kind of recognize. It's not becoming a zeitgeist in as much as, you know, it's not really, you know, the spirit of the age. In some ways it is, if you know, a semblance of Islam from somebody famous and they're putting this big sign on TV saying, become Muslim or look at Islam, that creates a kind of trend. To what degree the reality of that transpires into people actually finding Islam and becoming Muslim, we don't really know. But as I say, it has to be understood. There's a shift, however subtle. As I said before, anyone who has become Muslim or thinking about becoming Muslim should get off online, go offline, meet people face to face.
Yeah. Because,
you know, and not just that, seek out credible people.
Yeah. Now, going back to Matt Walsh, who is another speaker on masculinity, he believes that Andrew Tate has the prescription, and he raises some very valid points about the issues that men are facing in contemporary society and issues with feminism. But he says that Andrew Tate doesn't have the cure.
Well, that's
so he has he's raised the important points. So he's raised the issues, but he hasn't come up. He hasn't got an effective cure for this. Because what is his effective cure? Okay, so he's raised issues about the fact that, you know, the woke movement is inappropriate, that men are being feminized, that men need to be strong, that men need to be working hard, they need to be protectors and providers. This is some of his positive stuff. There's been negative stuff said in the past. But, you know, where does that lead us going forward? Because at the same time, his ultimate message, whenever you see any of his social media profiles, is all about, you know, it's about belittling people who are not rich enough. It's all about making money. It's all about power. Islam is not just about power. It's not just about elevating yourself. In fact, it's quite different from that. Yes, if it's done with the right intention, that's great. But Islam is also about, I mean, the fundamental part of Islam is to have respect for other people, to have compassion for other people, to have empathy for other people. And that doesn't come across in any of Andrew Tate's clips or interviews that I have seen across the board.
Well, when somebody becomes Muslim, there's certain gifts that Allah has given them and there's certain ailments that they need to overcome.
But can you overcome them? Because if he has got narcissism...
Can you overcome your ailments? Can I overcome my ailments?
If you're neurotypical, yes, you can.
Yeah, okay,
but if you've got narcissism
and
psychopathy, if you've got that, then no, you're not going to ever get to a point where you're ever going to be able to change the state of your heart and have empathy and remorse.
Even if you're the most narcissistic, hedonistic animal, and Allah gives you Islam, there's a potential for you leaving that behind.
Right,
now, it's not that it's automatically done. We don't get drunk about these things. We don't get really excited, oh, such and such a famous person's become Muslim. Everything's perfect. No, they've got work to do. It's for Andrew Tate to sort these things out. And, you know, people have to hold back on their judgment of him. Some people will, you know, it's two camps now. People that kind of support him and people that will never support him.
I guess ultimately the proof's going to be in the pudding. We're going to see when he comes out of exile, how has he changed? What is he going to be preaching? What is he going to be talking about? And, you know, does he...
Not that. It's where he travels to. It's whose company he spends time in. It's only after he spends time within the company of coherent Muslims.
But that's what he'll be doing behind the scenes. But what does he get? What is he going to be reflecting, and what is he going to be preaching, or what is he going to be talking about on social media? Because that's what people will be seeing. But that's how we're going to. That is how we are going to determine whether he is now. You know, has he moderated his Islamic views, and whether he's going to be a better individual, and potentially then has the capacity to embrace Islam at a deeper level.
Inshallah.
And that's something you think is possible. That's something I personally don't think is necessarily possible with Andrew, but only time is going to tell.
If I'd said to you, Aisha, 3 years ago, this man will become Muslim, you probably said it's impossible he could become Muslim because he's this, he's that. Do you understand? It's not really our business how, you know, things transpire in the future and things that are, again, this is in the hands of something way bigger than us. It's Allah who alam. Allah knows the future.
But there is evidence that people who have narcissism and who have elements of psychopathy and antisocial behaviour disorder, there is a very, very remote likelihood that they can ever really truly embrace anything beyond the surface. So I guess it's going to be time will tell, proofs in the pudding. Let's wait and see.
I'm not a psychoanalyst.
I guess I am a bit of one.
Wonderful. I hope that does.
So
you
I guess
well.
this is in conversations with many people in the psychoanalytical and psychiatric field who have all reflected this, who have all come back with the same core analysis of him having, dissected his videos and his posts, and they've come up with this, some of them in a very fast pace of time because of their experience, that this is a guy who has more fundamental issues. But, as you say, when someone comes into Islam, we also have to give them the chance, we have to give them the opportunity, we have to give them the time, because anyone's heart can change. That is the potential, if God wills. So I guess, we're going to have to see how, when he comes out of exile, what his social media posts are going to be about. And that's where the evidence is going to lie.
I guess so.
I guess so too. Well, thanks, Khalil. Thanks for joining us
Pleasure.
on this debate about the controversial figure Andrew Tate. Well, that's it from now for our discussion with myself, Aysha, and Khalil on Andrew Tate. Is he a saviour or a psychopath? Join me for the next episode very soon.